the Russian election happening very, very soon, very, very shortly indeed. Of course, you've got the Russian Free Legion, which now confirmed, making a push to try and take Belgorod. That's going to cause problems, significant problems for Putin. And as I've said before, I think any problem we can cause, or at least it becomes a problem for Putin, I think is something that should be good and something we should be encouraging to happen. Um, One of the things I want to talk next time when we talk on Geoscope, because we very often talk about problems going on in the world. I want to talk about a solution that we can talk about next week, which is how we can further isolate Russia, probably from, as we'll come to see in a moment, from its three current remaining allies. I think that would be something we should definitely look at on that front. And in a way, something that we should, I think, be openly challenging them in these areas and making covertly and overtly overtures to trying to stop many of their attempts in and around the world that Russia currently is trying to take. I think we have to look at this and be prepared to sort of beat Putin in many cases at his own game. He is being given very, very too often far too free hand to operate in the way that he has sort of been given. I'm glad people sort of waking up to that, but we need people in office who are, well, up for the challenge, shall we say. And I think we are going to come to sort of regret Ben Wallace resigning, because Ben Wallace was someone who got this conflict. He was the guy who went into Boris Johnson's office and said, "You are going to support Ukraine. If you don't, I am going to resign and I'm going to make your life a living hell for that." From at least from what insiders have said, we don't know how true about that happened, but we're now, of course, stuck with Grant Shapps. Put it this way, it would be easier to say which ministerial posts Grant Shapps has not had in this process. This is why I would far prefer if Tom Tugendhat had taken the defense secretary role. I would much rather have preferred him take that role than Grant Shapps. But hey, there you go. So yeah, we're going to talk about this because I think this is one of the things I sort of want to have a look at. This is Russia's changing face, and the way that Vladimir Putin is certainly viewing this war. This is now, as he's going to view it, a forever war. He's going to sort of make this an issue. But as we've seen in America and around the world, the reaction to these quote forever wars became societally very, very bad. Very, very bad indeed. And if Putin wants to make some of these changes, the way that he's going to go about it is going to be increasingly very, very difficult. That's for sure. So we're going to have a look at this piece in The Guardian that was talking about the changing face of Russia, what is going to happen at these elections, which, to be honest, we already know who the winner's going to be. But this is why the Kremlin does it. Puts on a show. Vladimir Putin will probably win with something like, 75 to 80% of the vote. Oh, look, he's got a victory. Maybe he'll win on 70, 75, and he'll have to come out and say, you know what, I recognize that there's a part of our population who aren't happy with the direction of things. I'm listening to you and I understand. Meanwhile, of course, it's all for show. He won't mean a single thing about it, but there you go. But yes, anyway, before we do get into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. And of course, on with this, because I think this is very, very, very interesting outlook to look at this. So this comes from The Guardian with the title of A Forever War, More Repression, and Putin for Life. Russia's bleak post-election outlook. So, for a few weeks in 2022, Vladimir Putin's world was unraveling fast. Russian troops had failed to take Kyiv, and the West was co-escalating coalescing around Vladimir Zelensky, freezing Russian assets abroad, and imposing unprecedented sanctions. Putin himself appeared very unhinged and rattling against Lenin, or appealing to the Ukrainians to overthrow their, quote, gang of drug addicts and neo-Nazis. As Russians go to the poll on Friday in an election with only one possible result. As we said, we already know who's won this election. It'll just be by how much Putin wants to say he wins this election. This election is going to be very, very stage managed. So back to it. So the Kremlin will then claim that this is a mandate for war, and this will enshrine Putin's bloodiest scandal as the country's finest moment. The Russian leader has often succeeded by presenting his opponents with only bad and worse options. These elections are no different. Now convinced that he can outlast the West, and that is the key thing that we are seeing, that Russia intends to outlast the West. That so long as there's going to be no physical proper interference, he is going to go, we can outlast them. And that is something where, once again, we have to sort of step up, not only providing the Ukrainians with the equipment that they need, because time and time again, the equipment has constantly proved that no matter the manpower advantage Russia has, that equipment and the quality of that equipment can far more surpass the capabilities of what Russia can field. So, again, something we can do, but also diplomatically affects as well, looking at more economic sanctions we need to do. There's talks, of course, about looking at putting sanctions on Russian agricultural products. We've seen very recently Russia flood Europe with more grain than it normally would do, which has vastly altered the price of grain, which many of the farmers recently among European, among certainly in Europe, they're saying, "Oh no, it's all this Ukrainian grain that's doing it." In reality, that's not the truth. It's actually the Russian grain that has massively distorted the price on this case here. So again, something that should be done. The EU is looking at doing something like that. But here's the thing: the EU, slow to act, slow to do these things. We as sort of countries have to come together and coalesce around what we can do. And I think there needs to be serious looking, if Putin does tend to this be a long war now, all of Europe needs to come together, and I include the UK in that. People who go, "Oh, you can't trust the UK or whatever because of Brexit," I'm sorry, that's just ridiculous diplomatic thinking. I'm sorry, I can't take you seriously when you say that. We all need to sort of come together and really think long term, how are we going to do this? How are we going to support Ukraine? How can we more diplomatically isolate and cut Russia off and cause more and more problems for Putin? Because there will come a tipping point where, what is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back here and causes something to sort of break and happen. That's what we need to be sort of looking for, these long-term funding efforts, these more diplomatic isolating efforts, trying to separate Putin from Iran, India, and China would be something we should be looking at. What other more sanctioned regimes can we look at? And this is why you had Ben Wallace, again, conservative, disagreeing on a ton of other political stuff, but this guy got Ukraine. And unfortunately, we are now stuck with, Grant Shapps. And it's honestly the equivalent of having a supply teacher in post. But where we currently are, this is why, if I ever got the opportunity, I would ask questions of Starmer, David Lammy, and of course the I can't remember his name now, the shadow defense secretary as well. What are they going to do when they get into power? How are they going to do stuff like this? This is, I think, should be a very, very defining question about sort of foreign policy and the future of this as well. Something we have to really look at. But anyway, back to this. So, of course, these elections are no different. Now convinced that he can outlast the West, Putin is now seeking to wed Russia's future, including an elite and a society that appear resigned to his lifelong rule, to the fate of his losing the war, or to his fate of his long war in Ukraine. Sorry. You are dealing with a person who started this war. He is already making a mistake of such a scale that he can't ever admit it to himself. A former senior Russian official told The Guardian. He said he cannot lose this war either. For him, that would be the end of the world. We all, thanks to Putin, have been led into such a shit show that there is no good outcome. The only good options can go from very bad to catastrophic, he added, and say that if Putin begins to lose, the person added, that we may then all well end up seeing the stars in the sky, suggesting a potential nuclear war. I do not think Putin will ever go that far to launch, to seriously start a nuclear war. I am very convinced at this moment in time, Putin's nuclear weapons, his nuclear arsenal, certainly his big bombs, do not work. I am more than convinced that those are not, and that we have, shall we say, crossed the line multiple times in many cases of where Putin said he would press the red button and initiate nuclear war. Hasn't done it yet, but we must sort of be prepared to stand up, because if Putin can just continue to threaten nuclear war, what's to say he doesn't do something very similar against NATO and then threaten nuclear war? You've got to be able to sort of stand up to these people, and this is why you have seen suggestions very recently with David Cameron going to Germany, with discussions about wanting the UK and France to extend their nuclear umbrella to cover the rest of Europe. Still very, very worried about Donald Trump presidency. Obviously, him saying that he would withdraw American forces, potentially even the current nuclear weapons stationed in, in Europe, which means that Germany, again, it operates under the, shall we say, a borrowing system is the best way to describe it. We don't have too much time to go into the moment of like borrowing American nuclear weapons. They, of course, need sort of permission to do them. We and the French don't. They are our nuclear weapons. So it's something that should be at least be considered. And it does seem that Germany has considered that as a potential option. Putin's re-election campaign has also included more than £1 billion of propaganda push, and according to the leaked documents obtained by Estonia and the outlet DIFA, reviewed by The Guardian, this has now put the war very much front and center. He's envisaged a military society stripped of its liberal trimmings. Insiders had said that while his team insisted that he focus on a positive agenda of social spending or even cultural achievements, he's instead chose to declare his candidacy while speaking with veterans of the war, whom he has said they should help in a form of a new management class to replace the old disgraced elite. And that is only going to cause more problems for Russia, because how the Russian military works is this is not seen as a valid career future progression. You do not stay in the Russian military. You go, you join it, you get like your credits, and then you would move on. People who are seen to be staying in the Russian military are not viewed very favorably, that you could not move beyond the military, that you've been stuck there. And Putin has gutted the officer class monumentally. And we have seen this actions multiple times on the battlefield, with soldiers constantly complaining, Russian soldiers, even in videos, trying to directly appeal to Vladimir Putin. Our commanders are idiots. They have no idea what they are doing. Please replace them. How's that happened? No, because they are not competent, because Putin has made them incompetent. So if you want to make them a new managerial class, by all means, go ahead. But it'll just cause more problems for Putin in the future. But now I want to sort of skip forward, because I want to skip forward to this part, talking about this forever war long footing, because I think this once again is the key point here. So the forever war footing. Although Putin's war planners envisaged a lightning attack that would take Kyiv in a matter of days, diplomats, insiders, and observers and activists largely believe that Putin is now ready for a far longer conflict that could take years, if not decades. And this is what we have to do. If this is what Putin has prepared for, then so too should we. And another thing that I want to do, another video that I'm going to make probably tomorrow, is going to be the consequences if Putin wins. Because not a lot of people seem to understand about these consequences, how it could empower Putin, empower him to do some of things, very similar things, into sort of NATO countries. So it is a big flashpoint. And of course, one of the things that the Ukrainians have constantly talked about. What about if Putin comes back in the future? You know, if Putin wins, what's to stop him coming back in the future? We've seen the initial peace proposals wanting to absolutely, completely, and utterly neuter the Ukrainian military so that this becomes a military that just cannot fight back against any potential future Russian invasion, or should we say lightning attacks, because it just doesn't have the military, the manpower, the artillery to be able to do that. So back onto this. So Putin appears to have dug in, and he may well not stop the war unless he is forced to do so, a senior Western diplomat in Moscow said. We do not believe he is serious about any peace talks. And I have made this argument so many times. So many times. And I would say to any of like people from Stop the War Coalition or anyone who like that, who is like, oh my God, we've got to stop the war in Ukraine. This is something that I would always bring up, that just Putin is not serious about peace talks. But there you go. I'll go on another tangent if I start talking about that. So anyway, back to this. We do not believe that he's serious about peace talks, and it would be up to the Ukraine anyway to decide them. Which I am very glad he has said that. That is something that I always want to stress, that it is up to Ukraine and should always be up to Ukraine about peace talks. What we should do is be like, the guy in the background with like the shades and, throwing some signs, being the backup to Ukraine on that. So, from my rare meetings with Russian diplomats, I get a sense that they are now feeling far more self-assured than after the start of the war. Russia is devoting an estimated 7.5% of its GDP to military spending. That is a lot of its GDP to do. And as a lot of economists have said, oh, Russia's economy growing, it's not falling. It's under all these sanctions. They aren't working, but they are. But Russia is doing everything it can to prop up its own economy. It's not even releasing full economic data anymore. So it's very hard to get an accurate, real assessment what's really going on in the Russian economy. But Putin putting all this money into military spending, even if should the war end, Russia's economy is doomed. It cannot continue in this way, because there is and should be an argument, regardless of whatever happens in the war, that until Russia returns that territory to Ukraine, those sanctions stay in place permanently, that there is no international recognition of those occupied territories, and that they should be returned to Ukraine, and that until Russia does so, the sanctions remain in place, thus forever crippling Russia's economy. So I think that's something that should be at least talked about, especially on an international scale. So yes, 7.5% of its GDP to military spending, the highest proportion since the Cold War, and the government's very lavish spending has now meant that factories making weapons, ammunition, and military equipment are working double or even triple shift patterns. Something else we should also probably look at. Maybe we should also go to our own war footing. Why not? Let's supply Ukraine. Bear in mind, Europe alone could do this if we decided to make that decision. We could do it. but we have to be able to sort of make that political decision. Germany as well, like its own defense industry would massively benefit. So would the UK's as well. And I've talked before about there's a very clear argument that the GDP or at least our own spending should be raised from, I think it's 2.2%, I think at the moment, to something like 4%. Not only does that help rebuild our own capacity, but that gives us again even more options to try and help Ukraine, certainly in this time, and obviously provide a lot of jobs, and obviously help our own economy in the process as well. But there you go. So where are we? So working double or triple shift patterns. Welders currently collecting overtime can make as much as white collar workers. A defense insider predicted that levels of spending would only continue to increase and said that calling for a change in a quote new permanent phase could last many years. On the home front, the restaurants in Moscow and St. Petersburg do remain full, projecting an image of normality. Remembering, it projects an image. The reality is that Russia's economy is not doing well as the images suggest. This parallel of imports, this is importing of Western goods via third countries. Again, via these third countries, something again we need to look at. And other new schemes have now sought to try and prevent the Russians from noticing a loss of these creature comforts and luxury products. Something we need to obviously start looking and countering. That if they have started doing this, started looking for ways around, well, now we need to react to this. Something that we should really, really be focused on. So the Kremlin wants to cosplay the Soviet Union, but without the food and product deficits, said a well-connected source in the Moscow media circles. This generation remembers their consumer good deficits really well and wants to prevent them at all costs. So if they start noticing that their creature comforts are sort of disappearing or harder to get, something we should look at. Publicly, Putin has played down the potential for an all-out war with the West, saying this week that he did not believe that the United States was planning on nuclear war by modernizing its strategic forces. But, he added, if they want to, what is there to do? We are ready. And again, I'd be very, very skeptical that even with this increased spending, that spending ain't going on their nuclear weapons. It is going to ammunition, tank production. It ain't going on their nuclear weapons. It's going on the fact that they have to now. So it is very well something obvious that as this is seen before, something sooner or later will break. And while Putin has quote claimed he is ready to negotiate, again he ain't, with Ukraine this week, he has also dismissed the wishful thinking and smeared Zelensky as a drug user, saying, "I do not want to say this, but I do not trust anyone." He told of Kislev of potential security guarantees from the West. I believe that any signals that Putin might be sending about wanting peace are just for a way of him to try and delay Western weapon deliveries to Ukraine, said Bolvev. And that is what I believe as well. That is what I believe he's trying to do. He's saying, oh, well, I'm prepared for peace while trying to delay those Western deliveries because, oh, why send weapons when he's ready? I think we in the West have to say, well, okay, Putin's talking about peace, but we aren't going to keep on sending weapons until this is over, until there is an actual peace in Ukraine. We are going to keep on sending weapons, regardless of what's going on, even if there are peace negotiations going on, because in the past, Putin has used these peace negotiations to try and strengthen his own positions while preparing for another counterattack or something else. Putin has done that in the past. There is no reason to stop any weapon, support until there is an actual peace. This is something that people in the West have to sort of realize on this. So back to this. So the even anti-war Russians that regularly parrot these views, the West bears some culpability for propping up the Ukrainian side, are either by deterring possible movements to try and conclude a peace or even prolong a conflict that they believe Putin will never allow himself to lose, saying it is clear that this war is not going to end with a victory for either of the sides, said a former senior Russian official. It won't end, and it will end as a frozen conflict. And that frozen conflict is going to continue for 100 years. If Donald Trump is re-elected as US president in November, it will put pressure on Ukraine to concede territory as he has vowed to end the war in one day. It's again the worry of a Trump victory. So a lot of things to consider there. And this is something the West now has to consider, that if Putin is going to try and freeze this conflict, then one of the ways we can help unfreeze this conflict and help the Ukrainians win on the battlefield, or just create a situation where the losses for Russia are just so unsustainable that even the Russian population cannot stand this. Bear in mind, in Dagestan, there were almost serious riots about conscription, because this is where Putin is recruiting from. He's not recruiting from Moscow or St. Petersburg. That's where he gets his power base from. He doesn't want those portions of the Russian society to see those losses. This is why he's recruiting from places like Dagestan, where he can get away with this. But if there's to be any serious problems or anything like that, then it's places like Dagestan that are going to be the thorn in Putin's side that could end up him having to lose this war. Because we saw during the Wagner push, there was nothing behind the lines. There was nothing stopping them from going to Moscow. It was only, because he stopped and decided not to go through with it because he didn't think he had the support. Again, one of the great unanswered questions: what if Wagner and Yevgeny Prigozhin had not stopped and gone all the way to Moscow? One of the great, I suppose, what if questions of our time and age. Who knows what would have happened? But hey, and that's where I believe we as the West should be overtly and covertly looking at what other problems can we cause for Putin. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.